So why this kit? And why this scale? Why this subject? Why? I had originally planned to build some kits, but simple subjects, small. One of them was the Airfix scale. Small kit, easy build, knock it out in no time. I'm sure I had it in my stash. I spent ages turning the house upside down looking for it. It seems to be missing. Most peculiar. I'm having it looked into. So I forgot about it, went about my daily life, ended up at some point popping into a model shop, and guess what was sat on one of the shelves. Life's path is a strange and wondrous thing. Or was it just chance? So thankfully, I could look at the contents and I was reasonably impressed. Looked like a good kit. But the price was another story. I thought it was very expensive for what it was. But I took the hint from fate and I bought it. Now there's no such thing as an unbuildable kit. But the trouble with me is, after a couple of weeks, 3 at a stretch, my interest wanes drastically. And it can show in a model very easily. So for such a simple kit, it fought me all the way. Maybe I was creating a rod for my own back, doing certain things that I did. So, without further ado, let's take a look at what I did with this kit. So some very nice artwork. Sold me. This bag has clear parts, decals, along with some resin parts, maybe to help scratch the clear parts. Now the clear parts are quite exquisite. The decals look wonderful on the paper. So let's look at the meat of the kit. Some very nice surface detail, if a little bit soft. So there's a nice breakdown of the parts, and one's not required for the WASP. Loose leaf CAD illustrated instructions. I'll find out later why we have such clear views of the undercarriage. The resin armament is a separate purchase and not included in this box. We have 4 colour options for this WASP. So I want to show you the amount of cleanup needed for all these parts, which isn't a problem. It's only a problem for me because the parts are so small. So I'm considering replacing these parts with plastic rod rather than try to clean them up. I'll play it by ear as and when I come to need these parts, and there are loads of them. Happy, happy, joy, joy. I've started to assemble some of the pieces, and as you can see, there's a lot of cleanup to do. This also means a loss of detail on these parts. I was also considering replacing the struts on the gearbox, but maybe not. Not in this scale anyway. The glued parts were cleaned up, with some of the detail replaced. I decided to open up the inlet and add some interest, better than that blank mesh representation. Four wheels are next, and I'm not happy with them after the cleanup. It would have been nice to have some space under those casters, but at this scale, maybe not. So I'm not going to think about too much about what I'm going to do next, but using this stuff, with this drill piece, let's go. This frame that holds the flotation packs needs a little bit more love. I'll start with cutting these off. I'll use a copy of the frame parts to get my angles and dangles for the new replacements. I've added a plate around the kit's frame. In reality, there should be another one underneath as well, but I thought that might be too much. Holes were drilled for the new plastic rods, so I've left enough length here so they can be trimmed back later. The seats are next, and here I decided to replace the seat frames. Just the thought of cleaning those kit frames made me go down this road. It's better to build than clean up. The seats are added. So the body is next, and the instructions show you to glue the front two parts and then the rear two parts first. But I'm going to glue the parts in this way. Both sides are dry. I'll just make sure there's no slippage, steps on the sides. Lovely. One issue that became apparent was the difficulty in locating holes on the leg framework. Guess time. So I took a rubbing of the side pylon and marked the 3 holes on it. Then I'm just going to mark the holes through the tracing paper using this drill bit. I'll use the same rubbing on the other side. So the 2 sides were joined, and then the 2 clear parts were added, and then some tin foil was PVA'd over the top. Just dry fitting the floor pan. It's a pretty good fit. I think I'll glue that in. The back piece. Then the engine floor. So the few slight gaps that showed themselves were filled in with some Vallejo putty. So before I can go on, I need to address the front wheel assembly. There are no locating holes for these parts, and the instructions have some vague pointing. Luckily, we have some nice plan views to get an idea where these struts go. It's just a matter of transposing that info onto the kit. So I copied and reduced the info down to size. I took a measurement from here to here. It's around 15 to 16 millimeters. I've added some circles on the copy to help me find the center of the struts. Just need to cut it out and match it up to the kit. Near enough not to care. I haven't a clue what that means. So I've been messing around with the clear parts just to see if there's going to be any issues or any problems with these parts. Now individually they fit very well. As a whole assembly, I'm not 100% sure yet. But before I go on and find out, I'm going to assemble the engine area. So these parts 31 and 32 I'll add later, and looking at them I'll revert to rebuilding them from plastic rod. I'm not cleaning them up. Now talking of plastic rod, I've replaced the drive shaft with plastic rod. I'm going to let that all set before moving on. The struts, as mentioned earlier, will be replaced. The last piece will branch off here. Now the rest. So onto the undercarriage struts, and I decided, looking at them, to replace all the parts using plastic rod. Once again, I'd rather do this than clean up the kit's parts. There will be a lot of work in trying to lose that mould slippage with ease. I've used the kit parts as a template to create the new ones. So the bonding in the middle here is just a talc and super glue mix. For the shocks, I'll use this plastic coated metal, once again using the kit part as a template, just to get the length. I'll deburr the metal ends with a file. So it was only later that I realised there was an easier way to add the shocks by leaving the upper wishbone strut off. With it added, it was going to be a bit fiddly at the front. So the last of the struts to add, and I'm hoping that with all the wheels added, all this geometry comes together. So all the wheels are glued and look okay. One thing I was worried about, that the wheels were not touching the ground, but thankfully they all do. I was contemplating on turning some of the wheels around, a bit like caster wheels do, but I wasn't too sure if they were mechanically controlled or freewheeling. Let me know in the comments if you know. Rotor head and blades are next, and the detail around here isn't bad, but it does look a bit soft. Could be worse, could be better. So I'm just using the grid here to square everything off before the glue dries. So while that was all drying, I noted looking at photographs that the detail on both sides here looked a bit flat, a bit weak. Needs beefing up, I think. So with the new strips glued on, I'll just soften the harshness a bit. Paint next, and I'll start with the cockpit using this colour. So with the paint dry, I'll wet the surface with water and add a pin wash. And with the wash dry, I'll pick out all that detail with a dry brush. So a white is added first to the blades, then yellow. So for the rear rotor, I've enlarged a copy of the paint guide to help me cut the right widths for the mask. So I'm just going to use a light grey for the colour for the leading edges. So the next thing I need to do, and I've been putting off, is applying the blue tint to this beautiful clear part. I only get one go at this. So I'm applying a very light coat first. I will let that go off before applying a couple more light coats, and then the last coat, the scary one, will be a medium to heavy coat. So I wanted to add a figure to this WASP, and I've cannibalised an old Airfix figure. But I've had to hack up the middle of his legs and add a cut from behind so I can get him to seat properly in the seat. Using PVA glue here, let's put him in position. So with him in place now, I can get on with the glaze parts, starting with this big piece. So onto the 4 doors, and they seem to fit okay. Bit of cleanup here and there, but I'm not 100% sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the framework by brush, and this will visually give me a clearer view of the fit of the doors and whether they need any more work. So I prefer painting by brush in this scale rather than fanning about cutting out masks. So with the paint dry and dry fitting the doors again, it's not a bad fit, just a few minor adjustments here. Now the rear doors are a very good fit and they can be glued into place straight away. So for the main colour, I found this mix, something I mixed some time ago. And looking at it applied to the plastic, it looks a bit dark. So I'm going to add quite a few drops of this grey colour, just to tone it down. So the framework painted, and before the paint dries thoroughly, I'll just go around and tidy up the edges with this chiselled toothpick. Now I was toying with the idea of using a brush to paint and finish off the rest of the body, but I think the airbrush is the way to go. So with the paint airbrushed on, I'll leave that to dry before dry brushing some highlights to pick out the detail. For the highlight colour, I'll add a small amount of grey to a small amount of the blue mix. While that's drying, I'll add some base wash colours to the engine area. So while those washes are drying, I thought I'd mess around and try out these decals. And the first thing I ran into is that these decals are on one continuous carrier film, which means that I need to cut around the decals that I need. Also, they are slightly out of register. Oh joy, I hate decals. So the decals have been applied and I had some difficulty getting these to suck to that detailed surface. I used these first to help with the decals seat down, but ended up using the Tamiya Mark fit, which seemed to be and looked more successful. I will seal all this in with a Tamiya satin varnish before moving back onto the engine. So I've used these three colours as washes to build up some interest around here. I was also toying with the idea of adding some hydraulic pipeline to add detail, but at this scale, not for me. So on to the final push and the not so easy task of adding the flotation assembly. Now I have to admit that before moving on, I got my balls in the wrong place on the flotation packs, and having to reposition them was very painful. So I'm going to start by adding this part first, as there's no leeway in positioning here, unlike the rest of the parts where I have a bit of leeway. To play safe, I'm going to use PVA glue to attach this part, especially with all that glazed area. Any mistakes can be cleaned up easily. Next I've added the rear's new struts. Once these are dry, I'll add it to the body. So there's a bit of a gap and some time has passed, and to cut a long and painful story short, the WASP slipped out of my hands and I dropped it on the cutting mat, smashing both of the flotation pack assemblies at the rear. It's so hard to grip this WASP carefully and add those complex strut assemblies. It could have been worse. I was very lucky that none of the landing gear caved in. With the pack still attached at the front, I cleaned off all the bent and broken struts that were still hanging on, even though there's a bit of artistic license going on here. So, I've never seen something so little give me so much trouble. But we got there in the end. So I'll take some pictures, and I want to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you for the next build.